I have analyzed Robert Frost's poem Acquainted with the Night. Robert Frost was born on March 26, 1874 in San Francisco, California. After the death of his father, he would move to Massachusetts with his mother and sisters, where he would graduate from Lawrence High School and marry his co-valedictorian, Eleanor White. And he'd then take over his family farm and work towards becoming a renowned poet. And though he wasn't originally given much of a chance in America, as American poets continued to turn him down and discourage him, he would move out to Europe and spend some time there trying to get his work into magazines and published in poetry books. And he found extreme success there. And this is where his fame kind of started, as Englishmen valued the relatability of his poems. Acquainted with the Night was written to grab a reader's attention and to find those who struggle as Frost had struggled, and to find strength and comfort in unity, and to get the attention and support that he believed he deserved as a poet. His works had worked against societal norms and weren't valued by American society, as mentioned before. And the English had found extreme value in his works, and this is what started his rise to fame. But now, his works continue to be relatable and relevant, and though he's mostly unheard of today, his works would definitely be widely accepted and pushed by media, most likely as a campaign tactic to push awareness or to raise awareness for mental health. Now here is Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. I've been one acquainted with the night. I've walked out in rain and back in rain. I've outwalked the furthest city light. I've looked down the saddest city lane. I've passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet, when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time as neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. Now, as you may notice, just reading this through, that the poem structure, if you've ever been into poetry, it may be quite familiar. And with its 5 stanzas and 14 lines, it perfectly, or fairly close to perfectly conforms to the Shakespearean sonnet, giving it a sort of melancholy tone and a lilting or song-like flow. Now, this poem is the narrative of a heavy burdened man blowing off steam with a long, long walk. And with carelessness for the weather or the time, the man is disconnected from others, and in so his own feelings are allowed to grow within him. These feelings of void and despair that he has are allowed to grow within him. And this narrative of life, whether things be good or whether things be bad, it just kind of continues. And as he is on this long, long walk of life, he is burdened by darkness or void, hence being acquainted with the night, as he knows the night or the darkness well. And as mentioned briefly a moment ago, Acquainted with the Night is a narrative of a man's walk through life. And it contains themes of of darkness and void perceived throughout that walk, an isolation or a disconnection from society as they become more knowledgeable on their walk of life, as well as a hopelessness in life, as we have no control and no say in what occurs and what doesn't. Before continuing on with that, though, we'll take a closer look at the lines in Robert Frost's poem. Starting with line 1, I've been one acquainted with the night. The narrator knows firsthand the darkness of life. The narrator knows firsthand the darkness of life, whether that be through the loss of a loved one, or the feelings of despair, and feeling that even when that feeling that comes when you're in a dark time and it feels like you'll never be out of it. For example, like if you've ever severely injured yourself or gotten really, really sick for any long period of time, you may be familiar with the feeling that you will never be better. Very discouraging. And I think that that's one of those things that makes Robert Frost's poems so popular, and as they are so relatable in so many ways. Where's I going? Okay, and then we'll move to line 2. I've walked out in rain and back in rain. As he will not be stirred or shaken by minor inconveniences, he will continue on his journey of life, unbothered and uncaring for the weather. And next we have line 3. I've outwalked the furthest city light. So this is one of the lines of the poem that could have multiple interpretations. One of my very first interpretations, I've almost found this connection into Frost's life or his background, as line 3 reads again, I've outwalked the furthest city light. I saw this connection between his life and the poem because Robert Frost had outlived his own dad. So that is one interpretation of that specific line. Another that I recently had, it could be the idea that he's walked out too far, and that he is so far gone that he cannot turn back. Hence the outwalking the furthest light of the city. So he's walked out so far that there's no more light in front of him, and he's just kind of lost, if that makes sense. Then we can move on to line 4. I've looked down the saddest city lane. This may refer back to the dark, ugly void which the narrator continues to feel. Then we'll look at lines 5 and 6 together as a pair. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. Disconnected from those around him, the narrator clearly isolates himself by choice. We'll work we'll work out those lines later as to why that happens. But moving on to line 7. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet. Yet again showing that the narrator is alone and that he's the only person present. And we'll look at lines 8, 9, and 10 all together as well. When far away, an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. Now here, this shows that even with his struggles and rejection of the world, the narrator is still human. And he wants to be acknowledged or missed, as the average man longs for connection and purpose or importance in life. Then we'll look at lines 11, 12, and 13. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time as neither wrong nor right. Describing the moon, brightening up the sky, life isn't all bad. In all the darkness, there's some form of light. And I think here that form of light is making the darkness appear even darker, unfortunately. Now, there is a true mystery here, and the true mystery for me is the line, "Proclaim the time is neither wrong nor right." Line 13. I have a question about that later if you want to look at that now and maybe just start thinking about it a little bit. Like, what do you think that line means in this situation? Proclaim the time is neither wrong nor right. And what might that mean to you? Now, following the interpretation that I had of the poem earlier, being that it's a narrative of a man walking through life, the only correct interpretation of this line, again, following the narrative explained, would be that the eventual end of his walk in life, or his eventual death. And then once again at the end, line 14, I have been one acquainted with the night. Meaning the same as it was before, but simply stated again to just kind of keep that line in the front of your brain and to show its importance. Now to continue on with the list of themes that I stated earlier, beginning with the theme of darkness and the dwelling of darkness in life, seen by the continued referencing to the night, such as highlighted multiple times here. There's references to the night, or just multiple dark or saddening events. Just kind of highlighted on this slide. But I'd like to focus more on lines 1 and 14. I have been one acquainted with the night. Here the narrator is accepting this tragic fact of life, and that no matter who he wishes he had been or who he wishes he could be, certain events have happened to him and he must live with those. This next theme works together with the last, as they truly are super intertwined with each other. Now, this theme is the isolation or disconnection from society that people acquire the more knowledgeable they become in their walk of life. And this disconnection can be seen on lines 5 and 6. I've passed by the watchman on his beat. And dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. This seemingly random remark, which the narrator drops without explanation, just shows the narrator's lack of awareness and conformity to societal norms, as, at least in this time, it would be considered normal to at least greet another person that you pass on the street. So, again, this was written late 1800s, early 1900s, probably around 1930. And next we'll look at the theme of a hopelessness or an uncaring view on life. Scene is highlighted multiple times within the poem. Hopelessness appears a few times. And one of the ones I'd like to focus on, if you look at it with me, is on line 4. I have looked down the saddest city lane. And this is a desolate and ugly lane which he leaves behind, not entering, or trying to better in any way, but simply viewing and leaving it, unable to take action. We'll let that sit there. And now, moving on yet again to poetic devices used within the poem. In Acquainted with the Night, we find alliteration, seen on line 7. I've stood still and stopped at the sound of feet, which is used in this case to avoid the silence which is being described in the poem. It avoids the silence from being interpreted as peaceful, because by no means is this silence meant to be peaceful. And it does this with the harsh consonant S sounds over and over again in the poem. And it works exceedingly well. I mean, just say that over and over and over again. I've stood still and stopped at the sound of feet. Saying that doesn't sound like silence to me, especially not a peaceful one. And this helps to convey the message of the poem by instilling a discomfort within the reader. Another poetic device used is ambiguity. And this is seen on lines 1 and 14. Again, a popular line, or lines that I'm going to reference quite a few times. I've been one acquainted with the night. And this is done to instill a curiosity within the reader, as the meaning of the line is unclear initially. This ambiguity catches the attention of the reader and conveys the message of the poem by really drawing the reader in and allowing them to think more deeply about what they're reading. The third of 5 that I'm going to list is enjambment, seen by lines Seen by lines 5 and 6. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. Here we see a sentence, which is regular to a narrative or a story, and it's broken over 2 lines. And this gives the poem a unique flow, or really a lack of flow, as it feels very broken. And as just mentioned, it kind of resembles the brokenness within our narrator. A well-known poetic device used in this poem is imagery, seen on line 12, one luminary clock against the sky. The imagery here provides the reader with an exaggerated or an emphasized view on specific details or events within the poem. In this case, it emphasizes the glow of the moon against the dark sky. And this imagery helps to spread the message of the poem by kind of like hot wiring areas of the reader's brain, allowing them to recognize and empathize with certain events or experiences within the poem. And finally, Robert Frost uses personification in his poem, as seen on line 13. Proclaim the time is neither wrong nor right, in reference to the moon. Yet, another ambiguous statement that makes readers question its purpose, or what it truly suggests. And the personification here gives objects hypothetical actions, as personification is the displaying of verbs and actions onto objects, which obviously can't make those actions occur. And it's meaningful in this case as it yet again portrays the narrator's loneliness and lack of company, as he's projecting his thoughts and ideas onto objects. And these poetic devices listed help give the poem a broken and alluring feature, drawing readers in, and this may be exemplified by lines 8 and 9, when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. Now these lines exemplify the mood created by the poetic devices, as they include enjambment, alliteration, and ambiguity, all together in one. Now, looking over this poem, even at first glance, it's clearly in the first person. I mean, about half of the lines start with the word I. Yeah. And knowing that the narrator's in first person doesn't really tell us too much about who the narrator is, and we're just kind of left to try to figure that out on our own. But I truly believe the narrator to be the author, Robert Frost. As rare as it is for the author to be the narrator. I believe this because after looking over his background and his biographies, because a specific line really stood out to me, and I made this connection with it. So that line is, I have outwalked the furthest city light. Now, as I mentioned before, this line specifically may have multiple interpretations, but one of my interpretations had been a direct connection to Robert Frost himself in outliving his own father. His father would be the city light, but regardless, it's a poem. And as I was saying, it may be referencing the fact that he outlived his own father, who had died of tuberculosis, when Frost was about 11 years of age. And so I'll state once more that the narrator of Acquainted with the Night is none other than Robert Frost himself. Now here is my reflection of the poem. I'd first decided on this poem due to its serious tone and broken flow, which really piqued my interest, and the curiosity which its lines had sparked within me. I had figured it would be an interesting poem to pick apart and to analyze, and then to put all of that into words, which it was pretty tricky. I went over this quite a few times. And the poem is relatable to many, and it will always be relevant, and I'm absolutely certain of that. And as I was saying, it's relatable to many, including myself, as I too have had my struggles and have gone through dark times. And I mean, with a global pandemic just 5 years ago, who hasn't? And my absolute favorite line that resonated with me the most, as I said, repeated many, many times, I've been one acquainted with the night. Repeated twice, just to show its importance. A cry, a mumble, a whisper, whatever it may be, however it may be read, even from the first moment that I read it, it meant something to me, something very familiar to me. Now here are a few questions. I'll read them aloud, but feel free to pause the video and read them to yourself, or pull out your phone, take a picture, or screenshot. Now, the questions for you to ponder on are: what do you think the line "proclaimed the time is neither wrong nor right" is truly referring to? And how do you interpret this line? How did this poem make you feel when you heard it or read it for the first time? Is this poem in any way relatable to yourself or someone you know? And did you have a different impression of this poem? Did this poem make you feel in a way different than the way I described it? Just a few things to think on. And those are my works cited. Thank you for listening to my probably crazy long video. This was one of those poems that I really, really enjoyed working through and looking at. It really made me think, to be honest, and it was something. I think that Robert Frost is a very great poet, and I have had the opportunity to look into one of his poetry books, and I find it very fascinating. Again, thank you for watching and listening to my 29-minute video. I look forward to seeing any responses that are formulated. Bye.